7SEEDS is a manga written and illustrated by Yumi Tamura that came out in 2001 and ran until 2017. Totaling 178 chapters, which were collected into 35 volumes, alongside a few one-shots, a short sequel series, and a fan book. It began its 16-year publication run in the Basatsu Shoujo comic magazine, but was quickly transferred to Shogakukan's Josei magazine, Flower Comics. Probably on account of all the not at all young reader-friendly dying and death the series features. Because most of its run was published in a Josei magazine, 7SEEDS is usually regarded as Josei, or for adult women manga. This is about as apt a descriptor as calling Spy X Family a shonen manga. But otakus have always been overly preoccupied with trying to relegate everything into broader genre categorizations, even if it's to the detriment of the material being sorted. Tamura even recognizes this lack of genre-defining distinction throughout her body of work, and goes so far as to condemn the strict classification of the 80s, 90s, and even current shoujo manga as being mostly romantic comedies and love stories bordering on the soap operatic. In a 2020 interview with Da Vinci magazine to promote her ongoing series that begins shortly after 7SEEDS finished, Don't Call It a Mystery, and was loosely translated into English by Tamura Machi on their Tumblr blog, which, by the by, is like the only place I could find that had translated any articles relating to her or interviews with her at all. Anyway, in this interview, Tamura says the following about her work in relation to the shoujo and josei genres. It's true that I'm often told that my work is not limited to the boundaries of shoujo manga, but I've never thought of shoujo manga as having any boundaries, and I naturally believe that it has a wide range where anything can be done. I mean, I've been reading such stories for a long time. From the perspective of an otaku of my generation, the school romantic comedy genre that everyone thinks of and often associates with shoujo is something that came along relatively later. 7SEEDS has no central romance. Well, it does, but the two are playing an elaborate game of telephone, looking for each other for a large majority of the series. There's no unique focus on close female interpersonal relationships, more so than any other relationships in the series, and it even focuses on interpersonal male relationships quite a bit. The absolutely massive cast of characters is nearly equally split between men and women because, well, the plot revolves around an effort to repopulate the Earth after an apocalypse. There's no focus on fashion or cooking or any other hobbies typically believed to be feminine in nature. And ultimately, the only thing really tying it to the josei genre is, to put it bluntly, that the mangaka's a woman. When it was licensed for release in French, it was even marketed as a seinen or for adult men series instead of josei. This is all to say that this series is not one that can be categorized so easily with an arbitrary demographic sorting and thematic pattern recognition. 7SEEDS isn't a story for adult women or young boys or the Japanese people or people from ages 18 to 35 or any other one subsection of the population that's strictly defined. Because at its core, 7SEEDS is a story for humans. All of them. And it wholeheartedly accepts all the caveats, complexities, and darkness that moniker carries with it. There's very little information out there regarding Tamura's formulation of 7SEED's premise and its stories, besides a claim on the wiki that in a brief author's note in one of the volumes, Tamura says the story concept was originally inspired by a news report she heard about a near-Earth object, 88959 2002 NT7, having a chance of colliding with Earth and bringing about natural disasters. I wasn't able to verify this because the wiki entry doesn't cite the chapter that it was supposedly set in, and none of the scanlations I could find of this series translated all of her author's notes in their entirety. I'm a bit skeptical of this because Object 2002 NT7 is recorded to have been discovered on July 9th, 2002, and 7SEEDS began its run 9 months before in November 2001. This wiki editor could have been getting the exact near-Earth object Tamura heard about on the news wrong, because there are many of these found regularly by astronomers. or only vaguely remembered this being referenced, and didn't do their due diligence of going to find which author's note it appeared in. That being said, an apocalyptic meteor hitting Earth and the events that follow isn't exactly a topic that's all that unique in fiction, so I don't think it's worth digging more than I already have just to find out if 2002 NT7 was exactly what inspired Tamura to create the series. What I was able to garner through the author's notes that were translated in the first handful of volumes, as well as another quote in the translated interview from Da Vinci Magazine, is that when Tamura started the series, she basically had no idea what the plot and events of the story were going to be. And she was probably under pressure from her editors to begin a new series after the end of her last ongoing series, and haphazardly went with the meteor premise. She goes on to explain that she was on the brink of taking a break from creating manga altogether due to this frustration and extreme burnout while making the early volumes, until while formulating the Team Summer A flashback that takes up most of volumes 7, 8, and 9, she was miraculously able to conceptualize the entire story until the very end, and her enjoyment in creating manga was restored. Due to the lack of more fleshed out resources, at least in English, on the creation and production of 7SEEDS, I'll go over some background on the creator's career. Yumi Tamura's first published manga debuted in 1983 with the one-shot Oretachi no Zettai Jinkan, or This Is the Time for Us, in Betsukomi. She went on to publish several other one-shots and single-volume tankobon collections, until the debut of her first big ongoing series in 1990, Basara, which ran in Betsukomi for 8 years until 1998. Basara's ended its run with 106 chapters collected into 27 volumes, and even was adapted into a 13-episode anime series. It was also the series that cemented Tamura, at least in the world of domestic shoujo manga, as a mangaka with a talent for telling sprawling fairy tale-esque sagas that remain grounded by her unique ability to craft many incredibly emotionally poignant stories with expert character building and as little page real estate as a single chapter, and in some cases, even less. Basara takes place in a desert wasteland version of Japan, many generations after an apocalypse. The population has been under the control of the vindictive and power-hungry ruler, the Golden Emperor. And when a pair of fraternal twins are born, a prophet predicts that one of these children is the child of destiny and will be the liberator of the people. Thinking that this is clearly the boy between the two, the local leader, the Red King, kills the boy, and the girl, Sarasa, adopts her deceased brother's name and goes on to live as a man in order to lead the rebellion against the Golden Emperor. I haven't read Basara, though I definitely plan to with how much I love 7SEEDS, but even then there's one thing that becomes clear when looking at the premise between her two longest running series. Tamura clearly is fascinated by post-apocalyptic settings. Even the majority of her shorter series and one-shots, entirely divorced from 7SEEDS and Basara, center around the end of the world, during or directly after, and as far out as thousands of years later. If not directly about the apocalypse, there tends to be a heavy focus on mature depictions of death and survivalism. I couldn't find her speaking directly on this topic anywhere, but these often secluded and naturalistic settings work well with the nature of her plotting paneling and fluid page layouts, as well as setting a nice juxtaposition against the care and consideration she puts into her characters and relationships. Whatever the reason is for this somewhat morbid fascination with the apocalypse, Tamura has clearly worked for decades on honing her abilities as an artist, writer, and storyteller to push the concept of the end of all things to its very limits, and 7SEEDS is her magnum opus in that regard. The first chapter of 7SEEDS opens in medias res, as the shy and timid Natsu is suddenly awakened from a pleasant dream, and finds herself in a submarine in the midst of a violent ocean storm. She's hastily forced to board a raft by a woman she does not recognize, alongside two boys her age she doesn't know either. The four are able to escape the storm and make landfall on a strange deserted jungle island. And as they explore and try to get their bearings on where they are and just what's happening, they introduce themselves. Of course, there's Natsu, the wilting wallflower who lacks any confidence or self-imposed autonomy to speak of. Only adult among them, Botan, who used to work as a police officer and seems to know more than she's letting on about their situation. The loyal, kind, and capable high school swimmer Arashi. And finally, the brash and rude delinquent Semimaru, Quickly, they realize there's something not quite right about this island, and they come across bright white bugs feasting on animal flesh, ferocious rodent-like rabbits, and impossibly large carnivorous plants. They meet a trio of fellow survivors on the island, and now that the group is complete, Botan sits them down and tells them the details of their situation. No one is going to save them, as there are no humans on Earth left to do so. The 7 of them are part of the 7SEEDS project, which was formed after astronomers discovered that a massive meteor was going to collide with Earth, and the resulting natural disasters that followed would wipe out humanity and thrust the entire planet into another ice age. As an absolute failsafe for the future of humanity, the Japanese government chose 5 groups of 7 healthy young people with no family history of disease or possible genetic ailments, and put them in cryostasis until a computer alongside them determined the outside environment was safe to be inhabited by humans. Each group of young people is named after the 4 seasons, with the exception of Team Summer being split up into A and B. They are Team Summer B, made up of misfits and social outcasts, meant to balance out the young people with exceptional talents in a myriad of different fields that make up all the other teams. Along with their adult guide that every team has, these 40 people's mission is to survive and prosper in the future by any means necessary. And thus begins the sprawling narrative of 7SEEDS. After this, we jump to Team Spring and meet the effective main character, the headstrong, bleeding heart Hana Suraguno, who we find out is the beloved girlfriend Arashi mentioned previously. After a short establishing story with Hana and Team Spring, Tamura goes on to unveil a massive cast of characters, as all the other teams are introduced gradually, and the mysteries of the end of the world they missed out on unravel slowly. Over the course of the stories, these survivors form groups, separate from one another, search for each other, and ultimately live, die, thrive, or barely survive as they struggle to accept this world as their home and the future as their own. As always, I'd like to talk about the visual presentation of 7SEEDS before diving further into my analysis of the story and its themes. Tamura is an illustrator whose style feels a bit like the mosquito frozen in amber. This isn't to say that her art hasn't evolved, improved, and even been heavily experimented with throughout her career, but when you look at the typical character rendered by her, it's extremely clear that she got her start drawing shoujo manga in the 80s and 90s. Heroines have impossibly large, delicately detailed eyes and lashes that seem to hold entire twinkling galaxies within them. Male leads have oblong faces with sharp jaws and furrowed gazes that could pierce stone. And absolutely everyone's hair always seems to be billowing in a breeze that may or may not exist. Whatever your particular feelings are on this type of art style, it should be difficult to say that Tamura's command of it isn't remarkably strong among the artists who practice it. She boasts a massive arsenal of ways to slightly tweak facial expressions, to the point she is able to get across just about anything on a character's mind with their eyes, nose, and lips alone, with extreme subtlety and in a way that's specific to their personality and character. Tamura's ability to convey the blueprint of the human face, and the many forms it can take and multitudes it can contain when expressing even the most subtle of thoughts and emotions, is both captivating and exceptionally practiced, especially for a story as human-driven as 7SEEDS. These detailed rendering of facial expressions, particularly in close-ups and headshots, are an essential foundation of the way Tamura uses paneling and page layout to dictate pacing, which eventually comes to define the enigmatic and often contemplative mood the series run is cast in. See, the actual speed in which the events of the story occur and the collective amount of chapter time spent on each one isn't actually that much slower than you think when looking at the entire amount of information delivered and actions passed within a handful of pages, chapters, or arcs. What makes the progression of events feel so gradually ever inching forward is the varied measure way Tamura chooses to let inner monologues, character interactions, and story events take up far more panel and page real estate than they really need to. This works in the story's favor for the vast majority of the series, but there comes a point during 2 very long arcs later in the run where the pacing of her panel and page composition starts to feel like it's actively hindering any progress in these parts that are already pretty tedious to get through. One of my favorite things about 7SEEDS art and presentation is the contrast between the way Tamura renders details, inks, and uses screen tones when drawing the environments and how they are juxtaposed against the characters. This is a survival story after all, and therefore the terrain, flora, fauna, and the cohesion of these habitat elements and how they interact with the character renders is crucial to the overall atmosphere of the visuals. Most of the naturalistic elements are rendered with heavy, nearly blackout ink with only prominent white cutouts to define highlights and lighting. When I reread the series for this video, I couldn't help but draw a visual connection between this extreme inking style to highlight mystery and impart the oppressive mood of the future, to the very similar way the Western superhero comic book artist Frank Miller utilizes the same techniques in his seminal Daredevil run that was published from 1979 to 1986. This inking style became a major through line for Miller's art throughout his career, and for all the issues I have with Miller's later work, and many of his social and political ideologies, it is undeniably unique and evocative, as well as difficult to replicate while maintaining the expertise in which he executes it. This aspect of his style is utilized best in his 1991 entirely black and white original noir comic, Sin City. While Miller obviously amps the chunky shapes and sharp edges present in his pencils up to 11 with this harsh and severe style of inking and highlighting in Sin City, Tamura's decision to juxtapose similar dramatic shadowing techniques alongside the airy and elegant nature of her character renders, ample use of soft and often glittering screen tones, and refined hatching techniques creates an incredible visual dissonance that's able to seamlessly communicate just how far removed the characters feel from any sort of harmony with the world around them, and even begins to evolve alongside them as they grow to appreciate it. This concept is probably best utilized in the many awe-inspiring double-page spreads throughout the series. Nearly every time I got to a double-page spread, my breath was completely taken away from just how beautiful they are, and many times, just how expertly Tamura uses the very concept of the double-page spread to get across not just the impossible grandeur of the world that surrounds us, and how insignificant we can feel in the face of it, but also the beauty inherent in this fact. This isn't the only way double-page spreads are used in 7SEEDS though. There's this incredible one that you might have seen if you're active in aesthetically inclined manga circles, depicting a member of Team Summer A, Nijiko, standing still and calmly drinking a steaming cup of tea as skeletons march past her in the background. I could spend a lot of time analyzing everything about this spread, but any interpretation one can conjure up about the individual aspects, how they come together, and what it is that they mean, won't ever manage to trump the arresting feeling of settling and unsettling deep in your core when you first look at it. That sensation alone is something most artists can only dream of imparting on their audience, much less as many times as Tamura does it in these double-page spreads, with incredible poignancy and artistry. That being said, for every evocative double-page spread, expertly rendered facial expression, daringly portrayed environmental detail or centerpiece, and well-composed page layout, there's just as many, if not more, drawings that, for a lack of a better term, are completely phoned in. This ranges anywhere from certain nondescript aspects of panel composition, lacking shading or screen tones, to entire panels or series of panels that are essentially just scribbles existing for the sole purpose of filling the page. I never felt like any of these less than impressive panels particularly weighed the experience of reading or interpreting the art down to a degree I just couldn't ignore, but for just how many people criticize mangakas for stuff like this, I guess it bothers some people. For most of the series run, these are almost always small, in-between panels that serve to move you from one action to the next. And at the end of the day, most of us will never know how back-breakingly difficult it is to be a manga artist. So many of the drawings in 7SEEDS are just as incredible as these are disappointing, that if it bothers you that much, I think you need to re-examine what exactly you desire to gain when experiencing art. This rings especially true as the series begins to reach its conclusion in the latter 8 or so volumes, as detail and rendering on characters and environments, and even page and panel composition in their entirety, start to take on this scribbly, bare-bones style that reminded me of the quality dip that occurs later in Yoshihiro Togashi's seminal shonen manga Hunter x Hunter. This quality dip stemmed from Togashi's struggle with severe back problems and other health issues relating to overwork, and I can only assume Tamura was dealing with similar health issues, or just all-around fatigue, as is probably the norm in the 4th decade of one's career in an industry as grueling as manga creation. But much like the characters in 7SEEDS and nature itself, Tamura finds a way to endure this by weaving the haphazard, scrawling nature her art takes on in these closing volumes into the very narrative itself. I can't get into the exact way this is executed here, as its context contains quite a few spoilers, but I can't overstate how this stroke of genius is only one singular instance among so many that cements Tamura's extraordinary ability as an illustrator and places her among the best manga and even graphic storytelling as a medium have to offer. Also, the way she sometimes draws these little scribbly fluffy animals is peak. I mean, look at this stupid mouse. Or these tiny itty bitty, I think they're wild hogs. Well, whatever they are, they're awesome. And what about this no thoughts head empty llama? I want one. The series would go down a whole letter grade for me if this idiot dog looked normal. In that Da Vinci Magazine interview I keep talking about, Tamura mentions that 7SEEDS is essentially her take on something as simple as a school drama. Because she has always struggled to depict and write within the confines of a school setting, she's never wanted to make a traditional school series, but she still found the dynamics that come from them worth exploring. I had never really thought this about 7SEEDS until I read this interview, because to be entirely honest, I haven't actively sought out or had much interest in any media taking place in school setting for a very long time. But looking at it through this lens, it's a quite apt comparison. A large cast of characters almost exclusively in their late teens, where most major conflicts arise from these young people's intertwining interpersonal relationships, and often juvenile understandings of their best qualities as people and worst insecurities as humans, is by far the most defining aspect of the series' narrative. But despite how it makes perfect sense as a colloquial way to frame the series, I still find it extremely interesting of Tamura to do so. There is so much that practically and actively removes 7SEEDS' premise and setting from that of a school story, that the process of filtering through all that to distill its very essence in the way Tamura is able to do so seems almost impossible to execute to me as a writer myself. Choosing to explore not only the depth of the old school man versus man and man versus nature narrative conflicts side by side, but to blend the two together so intimately that they almost become the very same, is an impressive, if not borderline insane one for a shoujo mangaka in the early 2000s to undertake. When you think about it, adolescence, specifically from the ages of 10 to 22, is kind of like a little snow globe version of the struggles we'll face through our entire lives. And the vast majority of the time we spend during this truncated snapshot of ourselves that will come to define everything going forward is spent in school. And so by framing 7SEEDS as a school story, not set in a school, it becomes a way to recontextualize growing up and coming of age as something far more sweeping than many of us can conceptualize even as adults. One of painful and joyous, beautiful and ugly, sometimes seemingly meaningless and other times deeply profound, among all the other contradictions that make up the experience of being alive and living among one another. There's this thing fellow video essayist YouTuber and one of the creators who inspired me to start making videos analyzing my favorite media, Amelie Doree, said in her review of the visual novel Cross Channel that I kept coming back to during my reread.
Humanity is a morally neutral trait, not one of good or bad, and it's one that we all have.
The concepts that our own mortality is ethically impartial, that every single living thing has the capacity to hurt others and to be hurt, and that the very act of being alive is one that is both inescapable and ineffable. is one that fundamentally ties the entirety of 7SEEDS together as a reading experience. The events of the story, the actions of the characters themselves, and how every single one of them feels and reacts to these are presented as objectively as possible. It's kind of like the age-old disclaimer, all thoughts and opinions expressed are my own, in the sense that even during the most character-focused and contemplative moments in the series, Tamura, as the author, seems more like an unbiased third party, whose role in all this is to relay the character's thoughts and feelings with as much accuracy and utmost equity as possible. Even the art itself never tries to get you to focus on anything in a way that might force you to form an opinion one way or the other about the sometimes cruel and irrational things the characters feel, think, say, and do. The characters and their actions and feelings are never cast in a light by the work itself as good or bad, fair or unfair, wrong or right. They just exist as they are, and without filter. And through this incredibly impartial way in which the writing and art presents the events of the story, the reader is only left to interpret the subject matter as it relates to their own experiences, moral compasses, and entirely subjective worldviews. This approach is not one that everyone will be able to understand or agree with, because depending on who you ask, some of the things the characters do can be seen as deeply upsetting and entirely unforgivable to portray. But in that very same vein, it depends on the character if they feel that way as well. This doesn't mean the characters in the series commit heinous crimes without remorse and other characters congratulate them for it or anything. All the characters, despite what harm and hurt they cause, have emotional and moral conscience, as well as the fact that the ones that commit some of the most intense of these actions do so under the influence of the often intrusive and impulsive thoughts and feelings that stem from the extreme trauma they've experienced. It's just that even if we all have things we strongly believe in, ideas and concepts that guide how we view the world and interact with it, reasons we do what we do, and past traumas that molded us for better or worse into who we are, those are very rarely, if ever, exactly the same between any two people. Our past experiences, our current circumstances, and even the very bodies we inhabit influence how we interpret everyone and everything we come in contact with. And 7SEEDS' larger meaning is rooted in the dialectic view of the way these factors and beliefs fit together to make the billion-piece jigsaw puzzle that is life worth building. As easy as it is to interpret these philosophically lofty themes of humanity's indomitable willpower to endure and survive long enough to find comfort in what we will leave behind, there's a lot to appreciate in the series' individual character journeys, both in how they work to impart and uplift the grander messages of 7SEEDS, but also how they relate to the struggles we all can go through in modern day. In total, there's 31 named characters across all the teams. And while some definitely get much more development than others, I can really only think of 2, maybe 3 that don't have at least one moment that's, if not narratively important, at least emotionally poignant. And that isn't even accounting for the many characters that only appear in the several flashback arcs throughout the series. These flashbacks can range anywhere from a singular chapter meant to add context to the introduction of a significant new character, and go all the way to spanning a dozen chapters with a story and characters so well constructed they very easily could have been their own series. The practice of taking a character with sometimes only a collective page of screen time and crafting hugely affecting emotional moments involving them that are gone as quickly as they come is not one even the very best writers will use all that often. And it isn't exactly hard to understand why. It's an exercise that requires you to invest a significant effort in understanding the psychology of storytelling, as well as your own relationship with empathy, not to mention the great amount of restraint you have to showcase to keep the end result from becoming overly sentimental to the point it turns sickeningly saccharine, or even worse, ends up on the opposite end of the spectrum, where it has little to no lasting effect on the reader at all. This is why it's so impressive that Tamura is able to do this to great effect so much that it becomes something that defines her work as a whole. There's this guy who shows up for, I kid you not, like 5 panels during the Team Summer A flashback, before getting trapped under a pile of rubble in a mineshaft cave-in. He then proceeds to fucking die from his injuries a few chapters later, and is never even so much as mentioned in passing by anyone, ever again. But by God, did I shed a tear when he took his last breath. All this praise I've given to 7SEEDS and Tamura's writing so far may make it seem like I feel there is nothing to critique about it, which isn't entirely true. For one thing, the premise and story have a not entirely subtextual focus on procreation that kind of makes me, as a Western consumer, feel weird. Concerns regarding the rapidly declining birth rate in Japan since the 1970s and the effect it would eventually have on the country's economy is one that is very present in modern Japanese people's minds. Mostly due to things like the late former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe's extensive efforts to spread awareness and encourage the raising of it in native Japanese population through economic incentive programs. So it's not surprising that this aspect of the culture's zeitgeist eventually became a focal point for a variety of media. But, I don't know, some of the execution here just feels really off to me as someone who lives in a country that is currently constricting and stripping women of their rights to reproductive health. Although characters like Team Autumn's Ron and Akio become fully fleshed out and dynamic characters later on, they are still very much introduced as antagonists, who refuse to give credence to the 7SEEDS project's ultimate goal of repopulating the Earth, and have put in place strict rules some characters think border on tyrannical regarding it among their group. Even the lengthy final arc, which takes place almost entirely underground, is textually cited as a metaphor for the experience of a baby as it's born. And it's not even that most of these go forth and reproduce parts are all that out of place most of the time. They just feel very far removed from everything that makes up the entire experience of reading and enjoying 7SEEDS for me. Which in turn created this weirdo dissociative moment where I was like, are there stealth pro-life undertones in this shit? If there were, would it ruin the series for me? I'll likely never know for sure because I can't find Tamura ever speaking on anything like that, and I fear I'm too personally attached to the series and the profound effect it had on me to really be a good judge of if these moments have any deeper meaning than that of commentary on how humans fit into the very natural circle of life and death. I first stumbled upon the series while looking for something to read on one of those Scanlation aggregate sites during the first few months of COVID lockdown. Even now, when I'm more of the opinion Tamura's 7SEEDS era art looks much better in black and white, as her coloring style is a bit skrunkly, to say the least. The cover for the first volume of the series is still incredibly striking and evocative, and the premise sounded interesting enough, so I took a chance on the first chapter without knowing literally anything about it. From the very first handful of pages, I was hooked by the strangely tense and suspenseful atmosphere and the slow yet satisfyingly steady pace that the questions were brought up and answers were revealed, to only then be completely recontextualized by a focus shift to an entirely different group of characters who, while all having different circumstances, stories were still defined by the very similar struggle to survive in a world that felt to be against them. It wasn't until I got to another one of these radical focus shifts that starts in chapter 16, lasts only 4 chapters total, and details the time shortly after Team Winter was released from cryostasis, that I realized just how special the series and Tamura's writing was. There's many other flashback arcs and a ton of other moments in the series, some occurring even before this, that dole out the same or similar types of heartbreaking catharsis, but none that felt quite as concise and even novel as this one. This is probably just due to the fact I had no idea what I was in for when starting 7SEEDS, because I had never heard of it in any capacity beforehand. But I still believe the Team Winter flashback is one of the most succinctly realized, expertly executed, and emotionally consummate storylines and any piece of fiction I've ever experienced. As a warning, I'm going to start getting into detailing my personal experiences with some very heavy topics in this next section. that might seem somewhat unrelated to 7SEEDS at first, but I believe they're extremely pertinent when I myself discuss the series, what it means to me, and why I hold it in such high regard. If topics relating to severe mental illness, suicide, and suicidal ideations are triggering to you, but you still are interested in how to read 7SEEDS and my thoughts on the anime adaptation, you can go ahead and skip to the next section titled Availability and Anime, or just go to the timestamp on the screen. Finally, if you are currently in an emotional state where you are considering suicide, I've put the number for several different hotlines on the screen and strongly encourage you to reach out to them, your doctors or caretakers if you have those, or any other people you trust so you can get the help you need.
I wanna start from the top, maybe like a do-over. Replace the voices in my head with blinding sin. I want a complete redo.
One of my favorite lyrics in all of music comes from the Midwestern emo band Modern Baseball's opening song from their 2012 album Sports, titled Redo. In it, lead singer Bryn Lukens details his desire to fake his own death and start his life over somewhere else. Or if not that, just start over from the beginning again. Over the course of the 2 minutes and 11 seconds, he begins to go back on the desire as he thinks about how he'll miss the things that make his current life worth leading, but wonders if those brief reprieves are enough. At the end, he eventually finds connection with the listener, who's as scared of the future as he is, and decides to leave those worries for the next day as the song ends. The entire chorus is excellent in my opinion, but the lyric that eventually became my favorite is just a fragment of it.
Try to forget that your bones would dismantle in the dreams you had. They'll collide with time. Your unrequited love for life.
My unrequited love for life. Do I love being alive as a whole or as the sum of its parts? Do I love living because I'm alive? Or do I love the things that make me think being alive is worth it? Is being alive worth it at all? These are things that I have spent many an extremely late Sunday night thinking about, staring at the ceiling as Relo Kiley's Better Son Daughter or Los Campesinos' Baby I Got the Death Rattle played so softly over the stereo as to not wake up my mom. Sometimes I'd break down crying, other times I'd fall asleep peacefully and wake up feeling better in the morning, and less frequently, I'd start writing my own obituary. Obviously, since I'm here today, excitedly telling y'all about one of my favorite manga in the whole wide world, those obituaries don't hold much power. They've long since been deleted from my Google Docs and buried on hard drives attached to laptops that don't even turn on anymore. And thanks to years of treatment and a hearty cocktail of medication, I'm genuinely in a much better place now, and have been for years. I very rarely think about my 3 attempts anymore, but that doesn't change the fact that there was nearly a decade of time where my desire to end my own life defined just about every aspect of it. My first of several stints in inpatient facilities was sparked by telling my therapist that at the time, the only reason I hadn't killed myself yet was because I wanted to see how Breaking Bad ended. Which seems so stupid nowadays, of course. All of it seems so stupid and trivial looking back. But it's a part of me, and I'm not ashamed of it. It didn't make me stronger, more empathetic, uniquely resilient, or any other stupid bullshit like that. But it did help me see much of the world more clearly, now that I've done the hard work to heal from it. And in the end, even now, my love for life is still very much unrequited, and I don't think it will ever really be returned like I wish it would. The bugs, the flowers, the water I drink, and the air I breathe. From the planet Earth to the solar system to the Milky Way galaxy and deep into every crevice of the entire universe in all its grand obscurity, can't love me back. But that doesn't mean I won't continue declaring my affection for it. My decision to continue endlessly rolling the boulder of simply breathing in oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide up that hill isn't an easy one, but it's my own. And like so many people before me, I will live in this world and love it till I'm ripped away from it. Because for me, that's what it means for life to be worth living. And by God, is it worth living. I bring this antidote up now because 7SEEDS is among the many things that helped me realize this fact. Throughout the story, many characters wrestle with their desire to die, both passively and actively, but in the end, none of them do. There's only 1 or 2 characters who die over the course of the story, and neither are the ones that express they have the desire to. While the series features explicit depictions of animal death and characters in flashbacks drop like flies, I think the specific effort by Tamura to put the characters in so many life or death situations that feel authentically dangerous, yet never actually killing them off, is one that could have so easily wandered into repetition that would make them feel meaningless. Only in the last arc does this actually ever get to the point of feeling futile, and even then, it is immediately followed by a nice revelation for a few of the characters, that if not mostly fleshing that feeling out, at least uses it to bring several major characters' arcs to a satisfying conclusion. Much like life, 7SEEDS is a sometimes dreary endeavor, punctuated by fleeting moments of tremendous beauty and joy. And also much like life, these moments of wonder and hope make the story worth reading. Being alive is kind of inherently traumatic when you think about it. The risks and lasting effects associated with being brought into the world sound fucking horrific when you actually think about them. Being an infant is defined by an extreme helplessness you didn't ask for, where you must completely rely on caretakers to stay alive. Unlearning that helplessness through your adolescence is an arduous process of attempting to take care of yourself and then failing at it over and over and over again, with very little external reward for finally doing so successfully. And as we move into adulthood, we continue failing at a vast variety of things. And then the moment we get one thing stable and solidified, it's just on to the next one. We repeat this cycle of extreme failures and seemingly only minor triumphs ad nauseum for the rest of our time on Earth. And the way it just never fucking ends can become overwhelming to say the very least. We can only do our best, and sometimes our best isn't good enough. If we fight what we feel is unfair every step of the way, we run the risk of deeply hurting others and becoming jaded and lonely. Becoming a person with a character you can be proud of often doesn't have tangible reward, and succumbing to the darkest depths of ourselves that we all harbor often seems so much easier by comparison. Communicating with and caring about other people has so much pain inherently built into it, but by choosing to not engage with it, we are essentially denying our very humanity. So basically, life sucks and then you die. But like botany expert on Team Summer A says in 7SEEDS, there's nothing pitiful or cruel about this fact. You'll definitely die someday, and until then, you can only do what you must do and make the most of your life. We all have our own interpretations of this, and while it may not be the case for you, for me, the very simple understanding that mortality is defined by the ability to cope and adapt to what we are given, and still, despite that, hope for better. That is what makes being alive so special. So now you might be thinking, okay, Rue, this sounds interesting. I'll bite. Where do I read and or watch this? And that's kind of where things fall apart. The manga has never, not even partially, been licensed or available to read in any official capacity in English. It was licensed in French at some point, like I mentioned earlier, but even then, it didn't seem to take off there either. And despite Basara being licensed years after it was completed by Viz, and having its entire run translated and published both digitally and physically by them, 7SEEDS never saw the same. Maybe the Basara release didn't sell well enough to make licensing 7SEEDS worth it, or maybe the switch from Betsukomi to Flower Comics had some weird legal or business-related reasons Shogakukan didn't pursue licensing in English. Whatever the reason, it's never been licensed over here, and there was one last glimmer of hope to bring 7SEEDS to a Western audience. In November 2018, a little over a year after the series concluded, it was announced that Gonzo, the animation production studio famous for their robust catalog of many beloved and innovative series, such as Welcome to the NHK, Full Metal Panic, Gankutsuo, The Count of Monte Cristo, and even fucking Hellsing, would produce an anime adaptation of 7SEEDS as a Netflix original series. But while Gonzo has an incredible library of work, they hadn't really had a massive hit in well over a decade, and there'd even been a noticeable drop in quality productions over the entire 2010s. In saying all this, I mean to get across that I think Gonzo had the very nebulous concept of an ability to make 7SEEDS anime adaptation work, but the cards were definitely stacked against them. After several information droughts, a release date pushback, and what I can only imagine was a boatload of creative differences during the course of production, the first season of the 7SEEDS anime released in its entirety on Netflix streaming service in late July 2019. And it was fucking dog shit. While there's a lot of things that contribute to the first season of 7SEED's utter failure as an adaptation of the source material, one of the most offensive things about it is that even if you've never heard of the manga, it remains totally unenjoyable to watch as anything more than Netflix binge slop. Whenever I think or talk about the series, God, I'm so mad, I try to start from a place of understanding that something went terribly wrong at some point during its production. Even if I hadn't been able to find out what it was, clearly something went wrong here, right? There's no way any writer would choose of their own creative free will to adapt roughly 80 or so 40-page long chapters of a series with notably slow pacing in 12 24-minute anime episodes, right? Right? But the more I think about it, the more angry it always makes me how nothing about this entire production seems creatively cohesive or considerate to the viewing experience, much less as an adaptation of the manga. The moody atmosphere of the heavily inked, chunky, and nearly impressionistic environments of future Japan are thrown out the window in favor of bland jungle scenery, slathered with thick layers of particle effects to hide just how visually disinteresting they are. The character designs barely attempt to capture anything of Tamura's delicate character renderings, besides the bare minimum effort to at least be partially recognizable as the same characters. I don't know. I think that they're hot ass. Well, I guess there are these like stray flyaway hairs on every character that are always at least 3 times lighter than their hair color, which I can sort of very barely understand what they were going for with. I assume it was intended to replicate the way Tamura cuts out thin lines from her screen tones on characters' hair to convey tousled strands, but it's executed completely aimlessly and feels tacked on as an afterthought to already shitty designs. One of my favorite parts of the first 50 or so chapters of the manga is the slow pacing that gradually reveals the scope of the world and the 7SEEDS project. Wading through the thick fog of mystery and suspense in these early chapters never feels meandering, despite the fact that it probably was, because like I mentioned, Tamura has been very open about the struggles she went through regarding her lack of confidence in the premise at first, and this pacing was most likely her also trying to figure out what exactly was going on in the story too. But instead of feeling like a slog to get through like some other arcs in the series, it manages to establish a sturdy foundation alongside an oppressive and altogether brooding atmosphere, as you feel like you're as disoriented, scared, and curious about everything as the characters are. In stark contrast, the first season of the anime feels almost optimized to deliver the story in a way that loses as much of this as possible. There's the major pain point I mentioned earlier that like 17 volumes of the 35 volume series are covered over these 12 episodes. So nothing can ever be sat with, and no events, characters, or relationships given the room to become anything more than a constantly rotating cog struggling to limp towards the end goal of just getting this nightmare over with. Hugely integral character introductions are briskly glossed over seconds after they occur. Massive emotionally important and status quo altering events happen with little fanfare. Essential exposition and shocking reveals happen at completely different points from when they do it in the manga, and are very rarely ever able to justify why they were moved at all. This all adds up, so when you're done with the 12 episodes, you just kind of feel nothing. And when I think about the fact that a series that was so incredibly beautiful and resonated with me so deeply could be so utterly distorted, mangled, and twisted by the never-ending content death march that is modern streaming service binge culture into something I can't even recognize as the same story at all, I feel utterly hopeless and depressed. I don't intend to talk about the anime for much longer, as this channel is supposed to be about things I like and not things I think are garbage. So I'll make my last 2 points quick. First, it would be unfair not to mention that the anime did get a second season produced by Studio Kai instead of Gonzo. And while I have absolutely no interest in watching it after the soulless endeavor that was finishing the first season, the general consensus among those who watched it is that it was better. Still not amazing or even good because, well, I don't really think a follow-up to season 1 ever stood a chance of being bent back into a shape that's something more than baseline enjoyable. Even then, it doesn't really matter to me if the second season is more watchable than the first, because the damage has already been done. The first season saw an initial boom when it was released on Netflix, due to its slick presentation and interesting premise, but quickly it became clear that there was no chance of staying power, as critics dogpiled on it and audiences' opinion varied anywhere from disliking it to the very evergreen in this era of streaming service, forgetting it existed 2 weeks later. Netflix canceled it after the second season released in March 2020, which is only a little bit funny in a morbid way, and the 7SEEDS manga ended up in a worse place than it started when it came to English licensing. I cannot stress enough that I would rather people miss out on experiencing the story of 7SEEDS altogether than have the anime be their way of doing so. It earnestly and deeply saddens me that so many people's first exposure to this story was through a version of it that is the equivalent of what a blow-up sex doll is to a living, breathing woman. I truly hate talking about a joint production that dozens of people worked on and provided their expertise and craft to like this, but if anyone on the team was genuinely passionate about this project, I fear their dedication to it was snuffed out extremely early on. Which is fine. Everyone needs to eat, and I don't hold it against anyone who worked on it besides the creative heads, who admittedly could have also been under pressure of corpo meddling as well. But that doesn't change the fact that ultimately, the 7SEEDS anime is an animated corpse of an adaptation, rotting away and permeating its foul stench into every aspect of the way the series will be perceived in the West from now on. So again, and for the final time, if for whatever reason you can't feasibly read the manga through the less than ideal channels available to, you're better off not experiencing the story at all. So yes, the only way to experience 7SEEDS if you can't read Japanese and trust me on the anime is through fan scanlations. Which is sad because sometimes, despite the immense amount of respect I have for fan translators and the vast amount of passion and effort they put into their work, it's just clear that there's a lot of personality and complex meaning being lost here. There's a lot of references to both classical and modern music, poetry, and literature littered throughout the series that are meant to highlight the importance of artistic expression and our connection to the world around us, and by extension each other through it, that become less impactful when you have a translator's note right below the panel explicitly telling you what's being referenced, who made it, and what year it came out. Some things characters say that are framed as incredibly poignant or cause the people they're saying it to have grand, worldview-altering realizations don't entirely make sense or unintentionally create dissonance between how the art and the story are framing it and the actual meaning of the words and phrases themselves. Directly translating the text on the page into being interpretable in another language is only half the job, which is why localization exists. And because 7SEEDS is a series that is entirely built around the sentimental nature of humanity and life itself, these moments and references that should be thought-provoking or poignant can often become weighed down by the inherent double-edged sword that is fan localization. Despite my criticisms, and unlike what I said about the anime, I don't believe the little bit of subtlety and meaning that gets lost in the shuffle should keep anyone from reading and experiencing the series, as most of what you miss out on is either subtextual in nature anyways, or more an issue with poor execution of meaning as opposed to losing the entire meaning itself. From this point forward, I will be discussing spoilers in more detail, but I don't intend to explicitly spoil anything relating to the events of the series' final few arcs and ultimate conclusion. I will also be explicitly discussing an instance of SA that happens in the series. So if you are at all interested in reading the series yourself and want to go in completely blind, or find the subject matter potentially upsetting, please skip ahead to the section titled Conclusion or to the timestamp displayed on the screen, and I'll meet you there. There's far too much I can and would like to talk about regarding specific events, their deeper meanings, and how they made me feel across the 178 chapters that make up 7SEEDS. But I want to try to find a way to centralize this section into something more organized and succinct for the sake of my sanity. So I'm going to do my best to summarize the events of, and my interpretations of, just one of the many interconnected character arcs and ongoing storylines throughout the series. Team Summer A's, specifically Ongo and Rio's. The beginning of Volume 7 starts off with what is probably the most important flashback arc in the series. We're introduced to a class of children living in what is seemingly an orphanage, and follow star student Ongo and his clumsy but intelligent best friend Shigeru as they go through the rigorous training to be chosen as one of the 7. This class of children have been extensively trained since birth, never leaving their mountain compound or exposed to anything of the outside world, including technology of any kind. With the knowledge that when they turned 17, there would be a selection test to decide which 7 of them would go to the future as part of the 7SEEDS project. As Ongo and the class grow up, they watch as their classmates drop out and are sent to live in the outside world, when they experience health problems like needing glasses, or it's determined they don't have the work ethic or physical prowess to continue. Ongo's grades and motivation to become one of the 7 start to slip, so one of the teachers shows him the grim reality of his entire class's situation. Their classmates, who they believed were adjusting to the outside world and living happily, but never heard of or about after they left, are actually being killed. One can assume this is considered humane by the teachers, as orphans genetically bred and raised in complete isolation, with no birth records or even last names, probably have very little chance of living a healthy and happy life in the modern world, even if only until the meteor brings about their end. But obviously that's beside the point, and Ongo is completely devastated by this revelation, yet still uses it as a motivator to work harder and make sure he and Shigeru are chosen to go to the future, while bearing the burden of this secret and feeling unable to tell any of his classmates about the fate of their friends. Ongo and Shigeru begin to drift apart as the other students like the composed animal lover Gengoro, the blunt and beautiful botanist Ayu, the president of the Saucer Eye Club and the top of the wind class Kururi, and the brooding, combat-capable Rio, among several others, blossom in their chosen fields and work their hardest to be one of the 7 sent to the future. When they turn 17, nothing seems to change about the strict routine of their life. And they go on training and learning as usual until one right after the other, strange, deadly accidents start to happen across the compound. This eventually leads to the entire central buildings catching fire, and all of the students left scattered to the winds before realizing that this is the test they've been waiting for. But this is no normal test. As their classmates and friends begin to die around them, they start to understand that it will continue until there are only 7 of them left alive. After a series of traumatic events for every one of the characters we've come to love, including Ongo watching Shigeru sacrifice himself and falling to his death before being able to reconcile with him after a fight, the 7, one from each of the specialty classes available to take, are chosen. Every one of them is traumatized to the point of catatonic by this experience. The top half of Ongo's hair even turns completely white from the stress of the ordeal. And to keep them from hurting themselves, they are almost immediately put in cryostasis, left to tackle the horrible trauma and abuse they've experienced hundreds of years in the future. The next time we see Team Summer A, they are drawn to the camp of a group made up of a combination of survivors from Team Spring and Team Autumn, as the prodigious concert pianist on Team Spring, Haru, plays the Dvorak's New World Symphony, often referred to as Going Home, over the ocarina Hana made him earlier in the series. This was a song that was often played over the loudspeakers at Team Summer A's compound growing up, and hearing it again sends Ongo, who has become the de facto leader of their group since coming out of cryostasis, into a blind rage. This, compounded with the possibility the other group might have let a dangerous bacteria out into the world during their recent visit to the wrecked Ryugu shelter, drives Ongo to fatally shoot Team Autumn's guide, Izuyoi. Eventually, Hana and the other members of Team Spring and Autumn reluctantly accept Summer A's invitation to live alongside them at their large and well-maintained camp, mostly for the good of the pregnant girl among them, Kurumi. Tension begins to mount between Ongo, Ryo, and the other teams as they learn that none of the others had to take a test or be trained to come here, until it's eventually deduced that Hana's father, Takashi, was one of Summer A's abusive teachers, and her and Arashi benefited from extreme nepotism when being chosen to come to the future because of this. Ongo starts to lose his grip on reality because of this revelation, among all his other extreme unaddressed trauma, which manifests in auditory and visual hallucinations of Shigeru and the others that died during the test, going into fugue states and sleepwalking, and behaving especially erratically, like when he kisses Ayu and pulls her on top of him without her consent. This all eventually comes to a head with a stomach-churning scene where Ongo attempts to sexually assault Hana because of an infuriating confusion he's been wrestling with, as he realizes how similar in nature he and the girl he's been blaming for all his and his teammates' suffering really are. Ayu walks in on this attempt before it goes too far, but Ryo decides that if Hana's presence is going to cause Ongo to behave in a way unfit for a leader, alongside a few implications that he has feelings deeper than that of friendship for Ongo, he has to kill Hana. Ryo cuts the rope anchoring her while she's careening in a cave looking for water source, and while she survives this fall, Ongo finds her and neglects to save her when she trips and falls into a rushing river, trying to get away from the man who attempted to rape her only a few days ago. When everyone else at the camp finds out about these events, they're disgusted and furious, and decide to exile Ryo and Ongo from their group for their crimes. Some mourn Hana, but are able to carry on with their lives at the camp, and others hold on to hope she's still alive and go looking for her. Ongo and Ryo continue to be major characters until the very end, as they come across and join up with Team Summer B, and by the end are able to inch ever forward towards healing from their trauma, and learn from this failure group that while they didn't deserve the unfair abuse that was inflicted on them by the adults that should have been taking care of them, they also weren't completely helpless back then, or even now, to stop the cycle of victimhood they feel trapped in. This is what I mean when I was talking about the horrible things the characters do to each other, and the objectivity in which the circumstances and reasons they happen at all are presented with. It's an incredibly delicate topic to even broach, much less execute on in the way it is in 7SEEDS. And honestly, I commend Tamura for the empathy and civility she's able to tackle such a volatile subject with. When I originally read 7SEEDS in 2020 at the age of 22, I didn't really understand why the SA attempt was included at all. Because, couldn't Ongo neglecting to save Hana when she fell into the whirlpool and was presumed dead be enough of a wrongdoing to justify being exiled by the group? Narratively, it would have been. As all of us know, premeditated murder is unethical, and neglecting to help save someone from a death that you are physically able to, no matter the circumstances, is morally reprehensible. But there's far more realistic meta implications to this than that. Murder and death have become such a normal part of the modern media consuming experience that despite that we understand leaving someone to die is wrong, and many of us wouldn't do it ourselves, it's not exactly something that would alarm most people to a deep degree. Attempted SA, on the other hand, is something that is taboo to depict explicitly, especially when it's perpetrated by a character who has, up until then, primarily been depicted as a victim of objectively horrible trauma at the hands of others. I could chalk lesser writers' use of a plot point like this up to an attempt to throw in some provocative, shock value-esque content. But I believe Tamura included this with the complete understanding of the severity of doing so. While we can all agree none of this will ever justify hurting others in the way he did, in the same vein, Tamura continues to portray Ongo as a victim of horrible abuse and trauma throughout his adolescence, who is also shouldering the burden of expectations of a leadership role he may have never wanted. He leaves the physical and mental scars that plague him to fester until they culminate and eventually manifest as some of the most harmful and destructive coping mechanisms that humans are capable of. There's a reason she includes the dialogue where he admits to this incident being driven by an impulsive attempt to establish a sense of the control and autonomy he feels he lacks in every aspect of his life and psyche. This all serves to help Tamura highlight that one of her character's capacity for cruelty, and the unfortunate fact he acted on it, shouldn't nullify his right to being treated as a human. Every single person to ever live has the same capability to hurt others in a similar way, and to ignore this will only serve to hurt us individually and collectively later down the line. So yes, Ongo is a murderer and attempted rapist, but he's also deeply unwell due to being a victim of similar abuse. Rio is an attempted murderer, but it's strongly implied he has an antisocial personality disorder that makes it difficult for him to empathize with the people around him and understand the way in which his actions negatively affect them. Our humanity cannot be defined in absolutes, as it's our very nature to exist in dialectic truths. And while people who commit heinous acts should face consequences for them, a steadfast belief in the shades of gray and the ability to be and do good that lives within all of us shouldn't be taken away from them when executing these consequences. That being said, I don't blame anyone for being deeply uncomfortable with what I believe is an extremely respectful way to convey these messages. Because yes, of course, some people will find it upsetting to watch characters that 100+ chapters have worked to develop with extreme depth and empathy stand up and testify to the positive ways in which an attempted rapist and a murderer's actions, unrelated to their crimes, have changed them for the better. I can accept this because I am one of those people. But despite the potential for this to be upsetting and even offensive, it doesn't mean it automatically shouldn't be included in a piece of art, or that there is an intrinsic value in the way it's executed. There is no blueprint for humanity, and we are all defined by so many different factors and circumstances. So while I ultimately think, in this case, the series is better for it, I don't fault anyone who disagrees. I'm going to make this conclusion short because while I could talk about 7SEEDS for hours and hours and still find more to say, more to analyze, and more to learn from it, I'm also not a good enough writer to not start repeating myself while doing it. While writing and editing this video, I felt the urge to throw out the entire thing and pick something that didn't feel as anxiety-inducing to cover for what's only my second video ever on this channel. I struggled for days to figure out where to begin when discussing and analyzing this series because that almost felt like asking where one would start when dissecting the meaning of life itself. Choosing what to highlight and what had to be cut for the sake of my sanity felt oppressively daunting when I thought about the sheer breadth and depth of the large majority of the cast and how they all fit together like jigsaw pieces to form a narrative that seems to be constantly bursting with all manner of possibilities to infer from. And that's not even factoring in just how much 7SEEDS means to me personally, as I feel like no amount of stringing together platitudes and profundities would ever really do a story that I treasure so much justice. And even now, I still feel like I've just spent the last hours speaking about 7SEEDS as if it's this sprawling, expertly constructed and plotted epic that belongs on the shelf next to the Iliad and Full Metal Alchemist, and in the process completely overhyped it so that anyone who reads it after watching this will be disappointed. Of course, these anxieties I feel so intensely, even as I hit upload this very moment, aren't entirely rational. Then again, isn't one of the defining traits of humanity the ability to be irrational? Water, fire, earth, and air can't even feel anything, much less feel irrationally about it. Animals and plants are very rarely irrational. If something scares or distresses them, there's almost always an evolutionary or self-preservation related reason they react the way they do. So why does sharing myself talking so positively about something that I care about so deeply feel so embarrassingly hard to do? When I was in high school, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, or BPD, which isn't really a defined personality disorder in the traditional sense. It's defined by a collection of traits that are often comorbid, one of which is feeling emotions much stronger than that of the typical person. My inability to control how strongly I felt the things I did and the extreme way in which I would react to them has been a big defining trait of mine since childhood. I've always taken simple letdowns harder, let little inconveniences get under my skin more, and even the most modest of kind gestures can have me beaming for days. For how much pain this part of myself has caused me, no matter how much I wish it could be toned down just for a bit, it does have the bonus that I can experience and appreciate art to the intense degree I do. 7SEEDS was an incredible experience for me, and one I'm proud to have seen to the end multiple times in my life. So even if everyone watching this video picked it up and confirmed my fears that I had completely overhyped it, that happening doesn't cancel out the way I feel about it, right? Emotions are just a fact of life, and 7SEEDS made me feel almost every one of them. And if that's all it takes for me to consider a story a masterpiece and owe some of my own healing to it, then so be it. So there you go, that's how 7SEEDS saved me. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you liked it and want to see more like it from me, make sure to like and subscribe. As always, if you found anything I said about 7SEEDS thought-provoking or even disagreeable, feel free to drop it in the comments, because I always like talking more about the things I love. I'm probably going to take the month of December off because I'll be traveling a lot of it, so look out for the rumblings of the next video, which I think will probably be on the puzzle platformer video game Iconoclast in January. Until then, make sure to check out my previous video on the mecha anime Roxaphon if you haven't already. And so with that, I've been Rue, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the flip side.